They mocked her tiny inheritance until she opened the hidden safe beneath the floor. It's a story about how the things that seem worthless can sometimes hold the key to everything. If you've ever felt underestimated or counted out, stick around because this one's for you. And if these kinds of stories matter to you, consider subscribing. We're building a community here for people who know what a real fight looks like. The door to the Evergreen Youth Transition Center clicked shut behind me with a sound of profound and terrifying finality. It wasn't a slam, not an angry sound. It was the quiet, oiled click of a mechanism that has locked 1,000 times and will lock 1,000 more. For 6 years, that sound had been the punctuation mark at the end of every day. Now, it was the end of a chapter. My chapter. I stood on the cracked concrete sidewalk, holding a single cardboard box. It contained everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a worn paperback copy of a book about constellations, a faded photograph of a woman I barely remembered, and a toothbrush. The air was cold for May, a sharp, damp chill that seeped through my thin jacket and settled deep in my bones. It smelled of wet pavement and exhaust fumes from the city bus that hissed at the corner. I was 18, officially an adult, officially free, officially and completely alone. Ms. Albright, my final case manager, stood in the doorway for a moment, her arms crossed. Her expression was one of practiced neutrality, a look I had seen on a dozen other faces in a dozen other offices. It was a look that said, "My legal obligation to you has now ceased." She didn't smile. She didn't offer a hand. She just held out a thin, manila envelope. "This is it, Ilara," she said, her voice as gray as the sky. "The solicitor's office address is on the front. He has your grandmother's effects." I took the envelope. My fingers were numb. Effects. The word sounded alien, like something from a black and white movie. "Her will was processed," Ms. Albright clarified, already turning away. "What was left of it? Don't get your hopes up. The state file says the estate is insolvent. Basically, it's a liability, not an asset." The door clicked shut again, this time for good. I was left alone with my box, my envelope, and the echoing phrase, "Don't get your hopes up." It was the unofficial motto of the system I had just aged out of. It was tattooed on the inside of my eyelids. I looked down at the box in my arms. It felt both pathetically light and impossibly heavy. 2 years of group homes, 2 years of foster placements, 2 years of state-sponsored limbo before that. All of it, everything that had happened since my mother's car went off that icy road, had led to this moment. Standing on a sidewalk, a ghost in the morning light. I had no key in my pocket, no address to call my own. Just this envelope, and the name of a lawyer I'd never met. The name of a grandmother I barely knew. Lena. Her name was Lena. That was the one thing I held on to, the one piece of her that felt real. The photograph in my box was of her, I thought. A young woman with my dark hair and a defiant set in her jaw, standing in front of a small, whitewashed house. A house I had no memory of. The bus groaned to a stop at the corner. Its doors hissed open like a sigh. It was my ride to the solicitor's office, my ride to the next phase of whatever this life was supposed to be. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. For the first time, the click of the lock behind me didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a starting pistol. I just didn't know what kind of race I was about to run. The law office of Davies and Finch was on the 7th floor of a glass tower that tried its best to scrape the perpetual gray from the sky. The lobby was a symphony of beige and muted chrome. The air smelled of expensive paper and a faint, floral air freshener that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of stress. A woman with a headset and a fixed, polite smile directed me to a small, windowless waiting room. I sat on a leather chair that was so firm it felt like it was actively trying to reject me. My cardboard box sat on the floor next to me, a shabby, brown intruder in this world of polished surfaces. I felt like an intruder myself. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 minutes, a door opened. "Miss Alara Vance?" A man stood there. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with thinning hair and a suit that looked comfortable rather than sharp. His eyes were tired but kind. This was Mr. Davies. He gestured for me to come in. His office was cluttered, not with the sleek, minimalist decor of the lobby, but with books. Towers of them. Stacks of files teetered on every available surface. It was the office of someone who did actual work. He cleared a pile of folders from a chair opposite his desk. "Please, sit down," he said. His voice was calm, a low baritone that immediately put me a little more at ease. I sat, placing my box carefully on the floor beside me again. He watched the motion, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He opened a thick, worn file on his desk. "I was your grandmother's solicitor," he began, without preamble. "Lena was a client of mine for many years. I was very sorry to hear of her passing." He said it like he meant it. It was the first time anyone had said that to me. When the state had informed me of her death 2 years prior, it was delivered as a bureaucratic update, a change in my official next of kin status from pending to none. "Thank you," I murmured, the words feeling clumsy in my mouth. "Ms. Albright, from the youth center, she said the estate was insolvent." Mr. Davies sighed, a long, weary sound. He pushed a thin folder across the desk toward me. "Legally speaking, she's not wrong. Technically, your grandmother left you one asset." He tapped the folder. "A property, a small cottage and 2 acres of land on the coast, up in a town called Port Blossom." My breath caught in my throat. The photograph. The whitewashed house. A house? He gave a small, sad smile. "Of a sort. It's been vacant for some time. It's in a state of disrepair." He then pushed a second document across the desk. This one was thicker, bound with a metal clip, and covered in stark, official-looking type. "And this is the problem. There is a lien against the property, a significant one." I stared at the paper. It was a legal notice from a company called the Coastal Horizon Development Group. I scanned the text, but the only thing that jumped out was the number at the bottom. It was a figure with so many zeros, it looked like a typo. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a debt," he explained patiently. "An old one, originally taken out by your grandfather. Over the years, with interest and fees, it has ballooned. Coastal Horizon bought the debt from the original lender. They now effectively hold the deed. The value of the land is, on paper, less than the amount owed." The words from Ms. Albright echoed in my head. "A liability, not an asset. Don't get your hopes up." The mockery wasn't just from her, it was written here in black and white. The system had looked at this file and seen a net loss. A girl with nothing, who was being gifted a debt she could never pay. It was a cruel joke. "So what does that mean?" I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. "It means the development group has made an offer," he said, steepling his fingers. "They are willing to forgive the entire debt. In exchange, you sign the property over to them. They've included a nominal payment of $1,000 for your trouble." $1,000. It sounded like a fortune. Enough for a deposit on a room somewhere, enough to eat for a few months. Enough to not be standing on a sidewalk with a cardboard box. It was the smart choice, the only choice. It was the escape hatch. "They want the land, of course," Mr. Davies continued, his eyes watching me carefully. "That stretch of coast is becoming prime real estate. They want to build luxury condos." He paused. "It's a clean break, Alara. You walk away with a small nest egg and no complications." I looked from the legal notice to the thin file with the property details. The whitewashed house in my photograph. the defiant set of my grandmother's jaw. Something inside me, a stubborn, foolish little spark, resisted. "What's the alternative?" I asked. Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair, a flicker of surprise on his face. "The alternative? You don't sign. You take possession of a dilapidated cottage with a six-figure debt hanging over its head. You become responsible for the property taxes. Coastal Horizon will almost certainly move to foreclose immediately. You'll be buried in legal fees you cannot pay. You will lose. And you'll walk away with nothing but the bill for my time." He said it all so calmly, so matter-of-factly. It wasn't a threat, it was a diagnosis. "But it would be mine?" I asked. "For a little while, it would be yours," he conceded. "Legally, until the foreclosure is complete, title passes to you." I thought of the group home, the shared rooms, the schedules dictated by someone else, the feeling of being a guest in your own life. The idea of having something, anything, that was mine, even for a day, was a powerful gravity. "I want to see it," I said. The words came out before I could stop them. Mr. Davies blinked. "See it? Elara, there's nothing to see that will change the numbers on this page." "I want to see it," I repeated, more firmly this time. A strange look crossed his face. It wasn't pity or annoyance. It looked almost like respect. He sighed again, but this time it was different. Less weary, more resigned. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, tarnished brass key attached to a simple paper tag. He slid it across the desk. On the tag, in faded ink, was an address. "The bus to Port Blossom leaves from the Central Depot every morning at 7, he said. "It's the last stop on the coastal route. You can't miss it." He stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. "My advice, as your solicitor, is to take the $1,000. Sign the papers and start your life fresh." "But," he paused, looking at me, really looking at me, for the first time. "Your grandmother was the most stubborn woman I ever met. She would have wanted you to see it." The bus ride to Port Blossom was a journey through descending shades of green and gray. The concrete sprawl of the city gave way to suburbs, which in turn bled into rolling farmland. Then the farms thinned, replaced by dense, dark forests of pine and fir that crowded right up to the edge of the two-lane highway. The bus was old, the engine a constant deep-throated groan that vibrated through the floor into the soles of my shoes. I sat by a window streaked with grime, watching the world unspool. For the first 2 hours, I was just one of a dozen passengers. But one by one, they got off at small towns with names like Oak Creek and Havenwood, until it was just me, the driver, and an elderly woman knitting a violently purple scarf. Finally, she too departed, leaving me in the echoing emptiness of the bus. The road began to climb, and through the trees, I caught my first glimpse of the ocean. It wasn't the placid, blue postcard I'd imagined. It was a vast, churning expanse of slate gray, flecked with white caps, stretching out to meet a sky of the same color. The air coming through the slightly open window changed, losing the scent of damp earth and taking on a sharp, briny tang of salt and cold. This was a different world, a harder world. The bus crested a final hill and began its descent. Below, nestled in a curve of the coastline, was Port Blossom. It wasn't so much a town as a collection of buildings clinging to the rocks, bracing against the wind. A handful of fishing boats bobbed in a small, protected harbor. A single main street was lined with low-slung buildings, their paint peeled and faded by the relentless, salty air. This was where she had lived, my grandmother. The bus hissed to a stop in a gravel lot next to a building that served as a general store, post office, and cafe all in one. The driver turned in his seat. "End of the line, miss. This is it." I grabbed my cardboard box and my backpack, which now held the file from Mr. Davies and the single, cold key. "Thank you," I said, my voice feeling small. Stepping off the bus was like stepping into a wall of wind. It tore at my jacket, whipped my hair across my face, and carried with it the cries of gulls and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against rock. The air was so clean it felt sharp in my lungs. I stood for a moment, disoriented. The address on the key tag was 14 Lighthouse Road. I looked at the single street sign. The main road was Harbor View Drive. A man in oilskins was loading crates onto a pickup truck. I approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me," I said, raising my voice over the wind. "Can you tell me where Lighthouse Road is?" He turned, his face weathered into a permanent squint. He looked me up and down, a quick, assessing glance that took in my city clothes and my cardboard box. "Not from around here," he stated, more than asked. "No," I admitted. "I'm looking for number 14. His expression shifted. The suspicion in his eyes was replaced by something else. Pity, maybe. "Lighthouse Road is that way." He pointed up a steep, winding track that led away from the harbor, toward a bluff overlooking the sea. 14 is the old Vance place. Lena's cottage. It's the last house on the road. Has been for a long time. He paused, then added, "You a relative?" "Her granddaughter," I said. The man's face softened. "I'll be. Knew Lena my whole life. Tough as a barnacle, that one." He shook his head slowly. "Sorry for your loss, kid. Place has been sitting empty since she passed. Be careful up there. The wind off the bluff can be fierce." I thanked him and started the long walk up the hill. The track was more gravel and dirt than pavement. With every step, the sounds of the town faded, replaced by the roar of the wind and the sea. The higher I climbed, the more exposed I felt. The sky seemed immense, the ocean infinite. After a 15-minute climb, the road leveled out. And there it was. It was smaller than I'd imagined from the photograph, and far more weathered. The whitewashed walls were stained gray by salt and time, with patches of plaster crumbling away to reveal the dark stone beneath. The roof, made of slate tiles, sagged in the middle like a tired old horse. The windows were blank and dark, like vacant eyes. A crooked picket fence, most of its pickets missing, marked the edge of the property. The 2 acres Mr. Davies had mentioned were a wild, untamed meadow of seagrass and hardy coastal flowers, sloping down toward the cliff edge. It wasn't just in a state of disrepair. It looked like it was being actively reclaimed by the landscape, slowly and patiently being pulled back into the earth and the sea. I walked up the overgrown path to the front door. The paint was peeling in long strips and the wood was splintered. I looked at the tarnished brass key in my hand. It seemed too small, too fragile to open a way into this forgotten place. For a moment, I hesitated. Mr. Davies's voice was in my head. "Take the $1,000. Start your life fresh." This wasn't a house, it was a ruin. A monument to a debt I could never pay. Turning around was the logical thing to do. Catch the afternoon bus back to the city, sign the papers, and never think of this windswept, lonely place again. But then I looked past the cottage, out to the horizon. The sheer, raw beauty of it was breathtaking. The power of the wind, the endless gray water. I thought of my grandmother, Lena, tough as a barnacle. She had chosen to live here. She had chosen to die here. I had to know why. I slid the key into the lock. It was stiff, resistant. I had to put my shoulder into the door as I turned it. With a groan of protest from the rusted hinges and a scraping sound from the lock, the door swung inward, opening into darkness. The air that rushed out was cold and musty, thick with the smell of dust, damp, and a faint, lingering trace of wood smoke and lavender. It was the smell of a life that had ended, waiting in the dark. I took a step across the threshold, my box in my arms, and let the door swing shut behind me. The inside of the cottage was a single, large room, with a sleeping loft built over one half. A thick layer of dust coated every surface, softening the edges of the furniture and muting the colors. Sunlight, pale and thin, struggled through the grime on the window panes, illuminating swirling motes of dust in the air. To my left was a small functional kitchen area, a stone sink, a wooden countertop, and a small ancient-looking stove. A few chipped ceramic mugs hung from hooks. To my right was the living space. A threadbare armchair was angled toward a large stone fireplace that dominated the far wall. A small, sturdy wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the center of the room. It was simple, sparse, but it didn't feel empty. It felt paused. I set my box down on the dusty table. The sound was unnervingly loud in the profound silence. I ran a finger across the tabletop, leaving a clean streak in the gray film. Beneath the dust, the wood was solid oak, worn smooth with use. I walked over to the fireplace. The stones were cold to the touch. A pile of ash lay in the grate, a ghostly memory of the last fire. On the mantelpiece there was a single object, a small carved wooden bird, its wings half spread as if about to take flight. I picked it up. It was light, almost weightless. I thought of Lena, living here alone, year after year. Was this her companion? A silent witness to the long, windy nights. A ladder led up to the sleeping loft. I climbed it carefully, the rungs creaking under my weight. The loft was just big enough for a bed with a simple iron frame and a small chest of drawers. The mattress was bare, but a thick, handmade quilt was folded neatly at its foot. I unfolded it. It was a patchwork of blues and grays and whites, the colors of the sea and sky outside. The stitching was small and precise. I imagined her hands, working the needle through the fabric, piece by piece. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the quilt in my lap. This was where she slept. This was where she dreamed. From up here, I could see out of the loft's small circular window. It was like a porthole on a ship, perfectly framing a view of the churning ocean. The sheer loneliness of the place began to press in on me. What kind of life had she lived here? Why had she never reached out to me? I was her only family. The anger and hurt I had suppressed for years began to bubble up. She had left me to the system. She had let me grow up in a world of strangers and paperwork while she lived here in this house with this view. I pushed the thoughts away. I wasn't here to be angry. I was here to understand. I went back down the ladder. It was time to search. Not for valuables, I knew there were none, but for answers. For some clue that would explain the debt, the house, the silence. I started with the chest of drawers in the loft. It held only a few items of clothing, smelling of cedar and mothballs. Simple, practical things. Wool sweaters, durable trousers. No letters, no photographs, no documents. Next, I went through the kitchen cupboards. They held tins of food, long expired. Jars of preserves, the contents dark and unidentifiable. Stacks of plates and bowls. Again, nothing. It was as if she had systematically scrubbed the house of any personal history, leaving only the bare essentials of survival. I felt a growing sense of desperation. Maybe Mr. Davies was right. Maybe there was nothing here for me. Just a decaying shell of a house and a legacy of debt. My eyes fell on my own cardboard box on the table, the photograph. I took it out and looked at it again. The young woman, Lena, standing proudly in front of this very house. But in the picture, the house was different. It was pristine. The whitewash was bright, the roof was straight, and there were flowers in the window boxes. A man stood beside her, his arm around her waist. He was tall and smiling, with a kind face. My grandfather. I had never even known his name. I looked from the happy couple in the photo to the sad, crumbling reality around me. What had happened here? What had gone so wrong? I paced the single room, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floorboards. I ran my hands along the stone walls, the rough wood of the window frames. I was looking for something, anything, out of place. A hidden drawer, a secret compartment. It felt foolish, like something out of a children's book. But I had to try. My foot snagged on something. I looked down. One of the floorboards, near the foot of the ladder to the loft, was slightly raised. It wasn't much, just a fraction of an inch, but in the otherwise uniform surface, it stood out. I knelt down. The board was shorter than the others, and the nail heads at one end looked different, less rusted. My heart started to beat faster. I didn't have any tools, so I used the end of the brass key from the door. I wedged it into the crack and pried. The wood groaned. The nails screeched as they pulled free. The board lifted. Beneath it was a dark, square cavity. My hands were trembling as I reached inside. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was a small tin box, the kind that might hold biscuits or tea. It was heavy. With shaking hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, were two things: a bundle of letters, tied with a piece of simple twine, and a small, tarnished silver locket on a delicate chain. My breath hitched. I picked up the locket. It was warm from my hand. I fumbled with the clasp. It sprang open. On one side was a tiny, faded photograph of my grandfather, the same smiling man from the larger picture. On the other side was a picture of a baby with a shock of dark hair. Me. A wave of dizziness washed over me. She hadn't forgotten me. She had kept me with her. I set the locket down and picked up the bundle of letters. The top envelope was addressed in a neat, elegant script. It just said, "For Ilara." My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely untie the twine. The paper of the envelope was thick and creamy, yellowed with age. I slid my finger under the flap and broke the seal. The letter inside was written on the same heavy paper, the ink a faded blue-black. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, strong, clear, and feminine. I unfolded the single sheet and began to read. "My dearest Ilara," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then you have come home. I know it may not look like much of a home right now, and I am so sorry for that. I am sorry for so much. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old woman for choices she was forced to make." I had to stop and take a breath. Her voice, her actual words, felt like a ghost in the silent room. I could almost hear her speaking them. I read on. "I imagine you have many questions. Why did I leave you? Why did I never come for you? The answers are complicated, and they are not an excuse, but they are the truth. When your mother, my beautiful, wild daughter, passed away, I tried to get custody. I fought, but they said I was too old. They said I had no income, and they pointed to this house and the debt attached to it, and they declared me unfit. The words hit me like a physical blow. She had fought for me. The story I had been told, the story I had told myself for years, was that I had been abandoned, forgotten. But she had fought. The system I had just left, the one that was supposed to protect children, had kept us apart. The debt, the letter continued, is the heart of the matter. It is a poison that has seeped into the foundations of this land for 2 generations. Your grandfather, Michael, was a good man, a strong man. He built this house with his own 2 hands. He believed this piece of land was a fortress, a place where we could be safe and free. But there were men who wanted this coast for themselves, even back then. They called themselves the Coastal Improvement Association then. Now they call themselves the Coastal Horizon Development Group. Different name, same greed. My eyes widened. Coastal Horizon, the company that held the lien. This wasn't a simple debt. This was something older, something uglier. They tried to buy him out. He refused. This land was his soul. So they found another way. They trapped him in a loan with predatory terms. A loan he was forced to take to keep his fishing boat afloat after a suspicious accident in the harbor. The debt was designed to be impossible to repay. It was designed to let them take the land. It broke his heart, Ilara. He died a few years later, and the debt passed to me. I looked around the small, dusty cottage. This wasn't just a house, it was a battlefield, a place of resistance. My grandmother hadn't just been living here, she had been defending it. I have spent the last 20 years fighting them. I couldn't pay the debt, but I learned the law. I filed motions, appeals, injunctions. I became a thorn in their side, a ghost they couldn't exorcise. I kept them from taking this land, our land, but it came at a cost. It meant I could never have a real income, never own anything they could seize. It meant I had to live like a hermit, and it meant, to my eternal sorrow, that I could not provide a home for you. Tears were blurring the words on the page. I wiped them away with the back of my hand. It was all clicking into place. The poverty, the isolation, the crumbling house. They weren't signs of failure. They were the costs of a quiet, decades-long war. I knew that one day I would be gone and the fight would pass to you. I also knew that they would come to you and try to trick you. They would offer you a pittance to sign away your birthright. They would make it sound like the only sensible option. Do not listen to them, Alara. What they want is not this little house. It is the land. And this land is worth more than money. The letter was nearing its end. This box is only the first step. It is a test. If you found it, it means you have your grandfather's spirit in you. You look for answers. You don't accept the story you are given. The real key, the real inheritance, is hidden elsewhere. The heart of this home keeps its secrets warm. Remember that. Whatever you do, do not let them win. This land is your anchor. It is the only thing they can't take from you if you are strong enough to hold on. All my love, forever, your grandmother, Lena. I folded the letter, my hands no longer shaking. A fire had been lit inside me. A cold, hard anger. All the resentment I had felt toward my grandmother had vanished, replaced by a fierce, protective pride. She hadn't abandoned me. She had been fighting for me in the only way she knew how. She had been holding this ground for me my entire life. The phone in my pocket buzzed, the sound violent in the stillness. I pulled it out. The screen showed an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? Is this Miss Alara Vance? The voice was smooth, professional, and oozing a confidence that set my teeth on edge. Who is this? I asked. My name is Julian Croft. I'm a representative for the Coastal Horizon Development Group. I believe your solicitor, Mr. Davies, has spoken to you about our generous offer regarding the property at 14 Lighthouse Road. Generous offer. The words were acid. I'm aware of your offer, I said, my voice tight. Excellent. We like to resolve these things quickly and amicably. We're prepared to wire the $1,000 to your account as soon as we have your signature. To expedite things, I've just emailed the documents to Mr. Davies. However, our board has reviewed the file, and given the time sensitivity of our development schedule, this offer is now final and will expire in 48 hours. 48 hours. An ultimatum. They were trying to pressure me, to rush me into surrender. If we don't receive the signed transfer by then, he continued, his voice losing a fraction of its smoothness, we will have no choice but to proceed with a full and immediate foreclosure. All our associated legal costs will be added to the existing lien. I can assure you, Miss Vance, that is not a path you want to go down. You will walk away with absolutely nothing. Are we clear? I looked at the letter in my hand. Do not let them win. I looked around the small cottage, at the dust and the decay, and for the first time, I saw it not as a wreck, but as a fortress. My fortress. Perfectly, I said, and hung up the phone. The fight was on. The silence that followed the phone call was heavier than before. It was filled with the weight of a 48-hour deadline and the echo of a stranger's threat. The initial rush of anger and purpose began to fade, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. $1,000. It was a tangible solution to an immediate problem. It was a roof over my head that wasn't about to collapse. It was food. It was a bus ticket to somewhere, anywhere else. What did I have to fight with? A dusty cottage, a cryptic letter, and a mountain of debt designed to be insurmountable. Mr. Davies's words came back to me. You will lose, and you'll walk away with nothing. He was a lawyer. He knew how this worked. Julian Croft, with his slick voice and his ultimatums, he knew how this worked too. They were professionals in a game I didn't even know the rules to. I was an 18-year-old girl with a cardboard box. Hope felt like a dangerous indulgence. It felt like the very thing Ms. Albright had warned me against. I sank into the threadbare armchair, the one angled toward the cold fireplace. The springs groaned in protest. The dust puffed up around me, smelling of time. I felt the full weight of my exhaustion, not just from the journey, but from years of uncertainty, of being moved and managed and processed like a file in a cabinet. For a brief, intoxicating moment, I let myself imagine signing the papers, the relief, the clean break. No more fighting, no more clinging to the past. Just a small pile of money and the freedom to disappear. I could get a small apartment in a city where no one knew my name. I could get a job in a coffee shop. I could be anonymous, normal. The thought was so tempting it made my stomach ache. What was I even trying to save? A pile of rocks and rotting wood that I had no memory of, on behalf of a grandmother I had never truly known. It was insane. It was sentimental foolishness. I buried my face in my hands. The rough fabric of my jeans was damp against my skin. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted the salt. I cried for the little girl in the locket, who never got to know her grandmother. I cried for the young woman in the photograph, whose dream had been poisoned. And I cried for the old woman who had died here, alone, fighting a war no one else could see. And then I cried for myself, for the sheer, overwhelming loneliness of my position. Sitting in the dark, in a dead woman's house, with the biggest decision of my life being dictated by a 48-hour countdown. It's a strange thing, hitting rock bottom. There's a moment, after the anger and the fear and the grief have burned themselves out, where there is nothing left but a profound and silent clarity. You are at the absolute end of your rope. There is nowhere left to fall. And in that stillness, you have to make a choice. You either let go, or you find a way to start climbing. I think a lot of people who are watching this right now know that feeling. That moment where giving up feels like the only rational thing to do. Where the fight seems impossible, and the weight on your shoulders is just too much to bear. Maybe you faced a debt you couldn't pay, a diagnosis that felt like a death sentence, or a loss that hollowed you out completely. You get to a point where you are just so tired. And the world tells you to be sensible, to cut your losses, to walk away. If you've been there, or if you're there right now, let me know in the comments. You don't have to share the details, but just let us know that you understand that feeling. Because you are not alone in it. This community is for all of us who have stood at that crossroads and felt the pull of surrender. It's important to know we're not the only ones who have faced that choice. I sat there in the growing dark for a long time, the tears drying on my face. The wind howled outside, a mournful, lonely sound. The house groaned and settled around me. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt companionable. As if the old house was breathing with me. I lifted my head and looked again at the letter from my grandmother lying on the table. The heart of this home keeps its secrets warm. It was a riddle, a breadcrumb. It was the only thing I had left. It was either a clue or it was the rambling of a lonely old woman. Signing the papers was the end of the story. Following the clue, that was, at least, a next chapter. I didn't know if it was the right choice, but it was the only choice that felt like my own. I stood up, my body stiff and cold. I would not be beaten by a phone call. I would not surrender in the dark. I would see this through to the end, whatever that end might be. Lena had fought for 20 years. I could find the courage to fight for 2 more days. My grandmother's words echoed in my head. The heart of this home keeps its secrets warm. It had to be the fireplace. It was the literal heart of the small cottage, the source of heat and light. I went over to it, my senses on high alert.
The fireplace was massive, built of large, rough-hewn river stones, mortared together. It took up half the wall. The opening was big enough for me to crouch inside. The mantelpiece was a single, thick beam of dark wood. I ran my hands over it, pressing, knocking, listening for any hollow sound. Nothing. Just solid, ancient timber. I looked at the stones themselves. They were all shapes and sizes, fitted together like a puzzle. I started at the top and worked my way down, pushing on each one, checking for any that felt loose or different. My fingers were raw from the rough stone, my knees aching from kneeling on the hard floor. An hour passed, then another. The last of the afternoon light was fading outside, plunging the cottage into a deep twilight. Doubt began to creep in again. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was just a turn of phrase, a poetic sentiment. Maybe the real secret was simply the story in the letter, and my inheritance was the courage to walk away. I was about to give up, to slump back into the armchair and wait for the morning, when my gaze fell on the hearthstone. It was the large, flat stone that formed the floor of the fireplace. Unlike the other stones, which were rounded and irregular, this one was perfectly rectangular, its surface worn smooth over the years. But that wasn't what caught my eye. The mortar line around it was different. The rest of the fireplace had thick, crumbling, dark gray mortar. The line around the hearthstone was thinner, lighter in color, and looked almost fresh, as if it had been redone more recently than the rest. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knelt down, my face close to the stone. I needed a tool, something to pry with. My eyes scanned the room. Next to the fireplace was a set of old, rusted iron tools, a brush, a shovel, and a heavy fire poker. I grabbed the poker. It was heavy in my hand, a solid piece of iron. I wedged the pointed tip into the thin mortar line at the edge of the hearthstone. I put my weight on it, levering it back. For a moment, nothing happened. The poker just scraped against the stone. I repositioned it, getting a better angle, and tried again. This time, I heard a faint cracking sound. A tiny puff of dust shot out. I pushed harder, my muscles straining. With a low, grinding screech of stone against stone, the hearthstone moved. It didn't lift, it slid. It slid sideways into a cavity I hadn't seen in the wall of the fireplace. It was a perfectly counterweighted door made of solid rock. My jaw dropped. It was ingenious. A secret hidden in plain sight, a place no one would ever think to look. Behind the stone was not a dirt hole, but a square, black metal door, set flush with the floor. A modern safe. And in the center of the door was a small, brass keyhole. The key, the small, tarnished key from the tin box. The one I had used to pry up the floorboard. It wasn't a tool, it was the key. My hands were trembling again, but this time with adrenaline, not fear. I retrieved the key from the tabletop. It slid into the lock with a quiet, satisfying click. I turned it. There was a heavy, mechanical thunk from inside the safe door. I pulled on the small, recessed handle. The door was heavy, airtight. It swung open on silent, well-oiled hinges. I peered into the darkness inside. It was a deep, fireproof box, about 2 feet square, and it wasn't empty. I reached in and my fingers brushed against the crisp, cool texture of paper. I pulled out the first item. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger, the kind used for old-fashioned accounting. I set it on the floor beside me. Next came several thick bundles of paper, held together with rubber bands. They looked like legal documents, bank statements, and correspondence. Then, my fingers found a stack of something else. Something wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string. It was heavy and dense.
I pulled it out and unwrapped it. I stared. It was cash. Stacks of it. Old bills, 50s and 100s, held together in neat, bank-wrapped bundles. There had to be tens of thousands of dollars. I sat back on my heels, stunned into silence. This was what she had been saving. This was what she had been hiding. This was the real inheritance, not the crumbling house, not the debt. This was the war chest. But there was one more thing in the safe. At the very bottom, another envelope, identical to the first. On the front, in the same elegant script, it said, "For when you are ready to fight." I opened it. This letter was different. It wasn't emotional. It was a battle plan. "Ilara," it began, "the money is for you to live on. It is the money your grandfather saved before they trapped him, hidden away for a day like this. Use it to hire the best lawyer you can find, not just an honest one like Mr. Davies. Use it to fix the roof. Use it to eat. It is yours. But the real weapon is the ledger." Your grandfather was a meticulous man. When he realized the nature of the trap they had set, he started documenting everything. Every threat, every meeting, every illegal demand. After he died, I continued his work. That ledger contains 40 years of evidence. It details their racketeering, their intimidation, their fraud. It implicates the founders of Coastal Horizon, men who are now pillars of the community. It is the truth. And the truth, when used correctly, is more powerful than any army. The other documents are the proof. Copies of the original loan agreements showing the fraudulent terms. Witness statements I collected over the years from other fishermen they targeted. It is enough, I hope, to not just stop the foreclosure, but to dismantle their entire corrupt enterprise. This was my life's work, Ilara. Not just to save our land, but to get justice for your grandfather, and for all the other families they ruined. This will be a hard fight. They will not go down easily. They will threaten you. They will try to bury you. But you have the truth on your side, and you have this land at your back. Now it is your choice. You can take the money and disappear. No one would blame you. Or you can stay. You can fight. You can finish what your grandfather and I started. I looked from the letter to the ledger, the documents, the cash. The choice was so clear it was blinding. Disappear. I was done with disappearing. I was done with being a ghost. This was my name. This was my land. This was my fight. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady now. I found Mr. Davies' number and pressed call. It was late, but I didn't care. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello?" "Mr. Davies," I said, my voice clear and strong, with no trace of the scared girl from his office. "It's Ilara Vance. I'm at the cottage. I'm not signing anything. And you and I have a lot to talk about." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of him sitting up, of a lamp clicking on. "Ilara? What's happened? I strongly advise you to reconsider. You can't win this." "I think I can," I said calmly. "My grandmother, Lena. She didn't just leave me a house, Mr. Davies. She left me evidence." I proceeded to tell him everything, about the hidden safe, the ledger, the witness statements, the cash. I explained the 40-year history of predatory actions by the company now known as Coastal Horizon. As I spoke, the sleepiness in his voice was replaced by a sharp, focused attention. I could hear him scribbling notes. When I finished, the silence returned, but this time it was electric. "A ledger," he finally said, his voice a low, stunned whisper. "She kept a ledger with names and dates?" "And details," I confirmed. "Of threats, of meetings. My grandfather started it. She continued it." "My God," he breathed. "Lena mentioned. She always said they were crooks, but I thought it was just bitterness. I never imagined she had proof." He paused,
and I could practically hear the gears turning in his legal mind. Ilara, this changes everything. This isn't a civil foreclosure case anymore. What you're describing, it's racketeering. It's fraud. It's a criminal matter. His voice had taken on a new energy, a new urgency. Okay, listen to me very carefully. Do not leave the cottage. Do not talk to anyone. Don't answer the door. That man who called you, Julian Croft, if he calls again, you do not answer. You are in possession of evidence that could destroy some very powerful,
Very wealthy men. They will not be happy to learn it exists. I'm not scared of them, I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. You should be, he countered, his voice firm. But being brave and being foolish are two different things. I'm coming up there. I'll leave at first light. I'm also going to make a call to a colleague of mine in the district attorney's office, someone I trust. We need to handle this by the book, and we need to do it fast. What about the foreclosure? I asked. The 48-hour deadline. I heard him give a short, sharp laugh. It was a humorless sound. Let them try. If what you say is true, they've been engaged in a pattern of criminal conspiracy for decades. A foreclosure on a property obtained through fraudulent means will be the least of their worries. We're going to put a stop to this, Ilara, a permanent stop. We hung up, and for the first time since I'd stepped off that bus, I felt a profound sense of safety.
The howling wind no longer sounded mournful. It sounded like an ally.
The creaks and groans of the old house were like a watchful guardian. I spent the rest of the night by the light of a single candle I found in a kitchen drawer, poring over the contents of the safe. The ledger was a revelation. My grandfather's entries were in a strong, masculine hand, detailing meetings with men whose names I didn't recognize. He wrote about the accident that damaged his boat, the sudden appearance of the loan officer, the impossible terms he was forced to accept. His last entry was filled with a quiet despair, a sense of being utterly trapped. Then, a few pages later, the handwriting changed. It became my grandmother's elegant script. Her first entry was dated the day after my grandfather's funeral. "Michael is gone," she wrote, "but his fight is not. I will not let them take his soul." And for the next 2 decades, she had documented everything. Every letter from their lawyers, every phone call, every conversation she overheard in town. She had cross-referenced dates, highlighted inconsistencies, and made notes in the margins. It was a masterpiece of citizen investigation, born of grief and rage and a stubborn refusal to be broken. I read the witness statements she had collected. They were heartbreaking. Stories from other fishing families, other small landowners, who had been squeezed, threatened, and ruined by the same tactics. Most had given up, sold their land for pennies on the dollar, and moved away. But Lena had found them. She had gotten their stories on paper. She had preserved their truth. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the ocean when I finally put the papers down. The sky was turning from black to a deep indigo, then to a soft, pearly pink. I had not slept, but I was not tired. I was energized, filled with a purpose so clear it felt like a physical presence in the room. I was no longer just Ilara Vance, aged-out foster kid. I was Lena Vance's granddaughter. I was Michael Vance's heir. And I had work to do. I started by cleaning. It was a strange impulse, but it felt necessary. I found a bucket and a rag under the sink. I filled the bucket with water from the hand pump, which, to my surprise, still worked, producing cold, clear water after a few rusty coughs. I started with the table. I wiped away the thick layer of dust, revealing the beautiful, scarred oak beneath. I washed the windows, scrubbing away years of accumulated salt and grime. As the clear morning light poured into the cottage, it was like the house itself was taking a deep breath. It was no longer a tomb. It was waking up. I swept the floors. I dusted the mantelpiece and the little carved bird.
With every swipe of the rag, with every bucket of dirty water I threw out the door, I felt like I was not just cleaning a house, but reclaiming my own life. I was washing away the dust of the institutions, the grime of other people's expectations.
This was my home, and I was going to care for it. Around noon, a car rumbled up the track. It was Mr. Davies. He got out, looking rumpled from the long drive, but his eyes were bright and alert. He carried a briefcase. "Elara," he said, nodding toward the now clean windows. "You've been busy." "There's a lot to do," I said. He came inside and I showed him everything. He sat at the clean table and read through the ledger, his expression growing more and more grim. He examined the loan documents, whistling softly under his breath. "This is dynamite," he said, finally looking up at me. "Absolute dynamite. The DA's office is very interested. They're opening an official investigation based on what I told them. They want the original ledger as evidence." He looked at me, his gaze serious. "This is your last chance to back out, Elara. Once I walk out that door with this ledger, the machine starts. It will be public. It could be dangerous. You can still take the cash, leave the country, and no one will ever find you." I looked around the little cottage, at the sunlight glinting off the wooden bird, at the view of the endless ocean through the clean window. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "This is my home." Mr. Davies smiled, a genuine, warm smile this time. "I had a feeling you'd say that. Your grandmother would be very proud." The days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet activity. The investigation into Coastal Horizon Development Group began immediately and with surprising force. Armed with Lena's ledger, the district attorney's office obtained warrants and seized decades of files from the company's pristine corporate offices. The story broke in the regional news, at first as a small article about a fraud investigation, then as a full-blown front-page scandal. The names in Lena's ledger, men who were once untouchable titans of local business and politics, were now facing grand jury indictments. The foreclosure proceedings against my property were frozen, and the lien itself was challenged in court as the product of criminal activity. Mr. Davies handled the legal storm, updating me with brief, reassuring phone calls. He had hired a top litigator with the money from the safe, a sharp-witted woman who seemed to relish the fight. My role in the legal battle was simple: to exist. I was the heir, the living proof of the legacy Coastal Horizon had tried to erase. While the lawyers fought in courtrooms far away, my fight was here, in the cottage. I used a portion of the hidden money to begin the slow, methodical process of bringing the house back to life. I hired the squint-faced man from the harbor, whose name was Silas, to help me repair the sagging roof. He and his crew worked for a week, replacing rotten beams and laying new slate tiles, their hammers echoing in the sea air. Silas rarely spoke, but he worked with a quiet competence that I respected. One afternoon, he brought me a thermos of hot chowder from the cafe in town. "Lena used to bring us this when we'd work on the boats," he said, not looking at me. "She was a good woman." It was a small gesture, but it felt like an anchor, a connection to the community my grandmother had been a part of. I learned that the people of Port Blossom had known all along. They knew about the accidents. They knew about the predatory loans. They had watched for years as Coastal Horizon, in its various forms, had squeezed the life out of their town. But they had been too scared, too isolated, to fight back. Lena had been the only one who dared. And now, with the truth finally out in the open, the town seemed to be waking from a long slumber. People started to talk. Other families came forward with their own stories, corroborating the evidence in the ledger. The case against Coastal Horizon became an avalanche. I spent my days painting, repairing, and cleaning. I replanted the window boxes with hardy coastal flowers I bought at the general store. I sanded down the old oak table and refinished it, bringing out the deep, rich grain. I scrubbed the stone floors until they shone. Each task was a meditation. Each repair was an act of defiance. I was not just fixing a house.
I was healing a wound that had festered for 2 generations.
One evening, after a long day of painting the exterior walls a brilliant, clean white, I sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The cottage was no longer a ruin. It was beginning to look like the house in the photograph again. It was beginning to look like home. I had saved the last of my grandmother's letters, the one marked, "For when you are ready to fight," to read when I felt I had earned it. I had kept it in the tin box, waiting for the right moment. That evening felt like the right moment. I sat in the armchair she had sat in, now clean and repaired, and opened the final letter. This one was different from the others. It was less about the fight and more about the future. "My dear Alara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you chose to stay. You chose to fight. And it means you are winning. I knew you had it in you. The Vance blood is stubborn stuff. I have left you a battle to fight, and I am sorry for that burden. But I hope I have also left you something more. I have left you a home. Not just the wood and stone of this cottage, but the land itself. This place, where the wind blows clean and the sea is always in your sight. This is a place to stand your ground. A place to be yourself, without apology. I spent so many years dreaming of you, wondering what you looked like, what you sounded like, what kind of woman you would become. I kept the locket so I could see your face every day. It was a poor substitute for the real thing, but it was all I had. My greatest regret is that I will never get to see you read these letters. I will never get to see you standing on the porch of our house, watching the sun go down. Do not live in the past, Alara. Do not let this fight define you. It is your foundation, not your cage. Use this home. Fill it with life. Fill it with laughter. Plant a garden. Read books by the fire. Fall in love. Live the life your mother and your grandfather and I were not able to. Live it for all of us. The inheritance was never about the money in the safe or the evidence in the ledger. It was about giving you a choice. The system you grew up in never gave you choices. It gave you rules and placements and ultimatums. I wanted to give you a real choice. The choice to walk away, free and clear. Or the choice to stand and fight for something that matters. By choosing to fight, you have already reclaimed everything they tried to take from us. You have reclaimed our name, our history, and our home. I love you more than words can say. Your grandmother, Lena. The letter fell from my fingers. The tears came again, but they were not tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of gratitude, of profound, overwhelming love for a woman I had barely known, but who had loved me fiercely and completely. She had given me the greatest gift of all, not a house, not money, but a foundation, a place to start, a home. The legal battle raged on for months, but the outcome was never in doubt. The lien on my property was declared null and void. Coastal Horizon Development Group collapsed under the weight of criminal charges and civil suits from dozens of other families. Some of the men in the ledger went to prison. Others were ruined, their reputations destroyed. The land was, finally and irrevocably, mine. But the victory in court felt like an afterthought. The real victory had already been won, here in this little cottage by the sea. It was won the moment I chose to stay. It was won with every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, every memory I honored. The story doesn't end with a dramatic courtroom victory or a sudden windfall of riches. It ends quietly, on an ordinary Tuesday. It ends with the smell of fresh paint and the sound of waves crashing on the shore below. The cottage is whole again. The roof is sound, the walls are white, and the windows are clear. It's not perfect. The floors still creak. The wind still rattles the window frames on stormy nights. There are scars in the old wood, marks left by time and struggle. But they are part of its story. My story. Our story. I've come to realize that an inheritance isn't always something you are given. Sometimes it's something you have to claim.
It's something you have to fight for, to rebuild, to pour your own heart and soul into before it truly becomes yours. My grandmother didn't leave me a fortune. She left me a foundation and a choice. She left me a place to stand and the tools to fight. The money in the safe is mostly gone, spent on lawyers and lumber and a new roof. But I am richer than I have ever been. I have a home. I have a community in the small, tough town of Port Blossom. I have a history that I am proud of. And I have a future that is my own, to build as I see fit. Sometimes, the things in life that look like burdens are actually gifts. A dilapidated house can become a fortress.
A painful history can become a source of strength. A fight you never asked for can become the very thing that sets you free. What my grandmother taught me, through her letters and her quiet war, is that home isn't just a place. It's an act of defiance. It's the stubborn belief that you have a right to take up space in the world, to put down roots, and to defend your patch of ground. It's a story you tell yourself, and then you make it true. I am living that story now. I wake up every morning to the sight of the sea, and I feel a sense of belonging that I had never known was possible. I am Alara Vance, of 14 Lighthouse Road, and I am finally home. This entire journey started because I was underestimated. The system looked at me, looked at my inheritance, and wrote me off. They saw a liability, not an asset. They saw a problem, not a person. But they were wrong. And if there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. Do not let anyone else write your story for you.
Do not let them define your worth. The most valuable things are often hidden, waiting for you to be brave enough to look beneath the surface, to pry up the floorboards of your own life and see what treasures are waiting there. Thank you for listening, for being a part of this. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own patch of ground, I hope you'll consider subscribing and joining our community. And please, in the comments below, I'd love for you to share one thing you've learned about the meaning of home. It doesn't have to be a place. It can be a person, a feeling, a memory. I will read every single one, because all of our stories matter. And together, they build a home for all of us.